Good, you can all hear me. I'm here today to talk about starting from nothing. But before we get into that, other than the peanut butter intro, it's probably a good idea to introduce myself properly. My name is Lawrence. I spent a while doing staff work. So I was previously, before my current role, working at a company called GoCardless. They're a fintech unicorn, mostly headquartered in London. Whilst there, I was a principal SRE, so did a lot of infrastructure work, but also did a lot of product work towards the end of my time as well. This set me up pretty well for my current role, which is product engineer at a company called Incident.io. We're an incident management company. We produce products that are, for example, our on-call product, which at the end of the day makes your phone ring when something goes wrong in your systems. I joined the company 3 years ago as the first hire, so it was myself and 3 founders. Since then, we've grown to be about 80 people, so 50 people in London, 30 in New York, so you can imagine quite a lot has gone on, and we have started from nothing several times over, which is kind of the point of this talk. But yeah, now you know who I am and what I do, let's get into it. Big problems, that's your job. So everyone is here right now in this room. If you're here in StaffPlus, it's because your company relies on you to tackle hard problems. These are problems that come with no guidance. They're usually extremely ambiguous. They will materially impact the success of the company. Big problems don't always come out of the blue, but I'm sure that quite a few people in this room have probably been in a catch-up with their manager. Perhaps they're the CTO or another person in leadership, where they went, oh, hey, so we had a board meeting yesterday, and there's something I really need your help with. Great. Here starts a multi-month or possibly multi-year effort where all eyes are on you to try and solve something that's pretty damn important and a bit stressful. So that is the job. It's not easy. But despite each of these problems being fairly unique, I think there's a lot of commonalities that we can find across our experiences that we as technical leaders can help support each other with. So that's what this talk is about. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my experience about a recent big problem. So in this case, it will be about building the on-call product Incident. And then once I've introduced that project, I'm going to walk you through the stages as I see them as a staff engineer trying to support that project. So these are broadly planning, execution, and then the stepping away. Well, I'm going to cover a variety of ways that you as a staff engineer can actually have impact on a problem of this size. I think it's going to be quite interesting because as a staff engineer, I think you all know, you interact with these projects in a bit of a different way than you did in other roles. So if you're just stepping into staff engineering, then maybe it gives you a bit of perspective there. But otherwise, I'm aiming to give you some generic advice that you can take into your own role or possibly apply in your own context. So yeah, let's introduce the case study. So we have recently released an on-call product. As a system, it's pretty basic. It receives alerts, it figures out who to contact, and then it makes their phone ring. So that is a massive simplification, but it will do for now. So we always wanted to build on-call. In fact, it's one of the reasons I joined the company in the first place. But we were waiting for the right time, and that time came in July last year, when we decided that if we wanted to do this, we probably needed to get ahead of our competitors and start building it so that we would have it in time. So like many of these big problems that you end up dealing with, it's externally motivated. We've got some pressure externally, which is often quite fun. It lends more urgency to the situation, but it's great at tearing through organizational red tape, nothing like an existential threat for something like that. So it took 10 months to go from the first planning sessions to releasing a GA product, which was like the mobile app and everything that came with it. And we initially started with a team of 6, but ended with about 15 people working on it. So that gives you kind of what we did, and I've created what may be the world's hackiest of timelines to give you a sense of what the project actually looked like, so that you can understand kind of what happened at what time. So please forgive my diagramming. But you can see in this diagram that we've got the 2 of the 3 phases I mentioned before. So you've got the planning there, under which we have building the team, discovery and scoping. And then we have execution, which is actually where you get to building the thing. So these are all the projects that we did to try and eventually produce an on-call product that someone would want to buy. So I think it's clear at this point that lots of people are involved in a project like this. But this talk is about, as a staff engineer, how do you involve yourself in a project like this? How do you help support it in a way that is kind of a differentiated role that you can take because of your experience or position in the company? So I got my crayons, and I somehow made this diagram even worse. So you can see my face up on the top left, and what I've done is I've tried charting my path through the project as the time went on. So you can see we had 15 people working on this at the end, so you can't be in every place at all times. But you can see I was there from the start, going through the planning. I was there for the scoping. And then there was an intense period where I got stuck in with the team, actually building the foundations. Before, at the point that that team gets a bit more confident, you start bubbling off and helping support bootstrapping new teams and kind of growing the efforts of the company, helping them invest more into the project. So yeah, I don't claim to be a perfect staff engineer, nothing like it, but I think my team say they at least valued my involvement on the project. So I think this can look as, or this you can see this as a typical path that one might take through a project of this size if you're a staff engineer. That should be enough, I think, for you to have it in your mind what this project was, so that when we go through some of the examples in a bit, you can draw lines from the advice I'm giving you back to how it worked in this project. But yeah, I'm going to narrow in on what these stages are. So yeah, let's discuss planning. So there are 3 parts to planning, as I see it, when it comes to a project like this. You have the building the team, which is where you put together the group who are going to work on this. They're the people who are going to start work on it. Importantly, they're not the people who might finish. You're probably going to add a lot of people over the time of the project, so these are just the people who are going to set off at the start. Then, as a senior technical member of staff, you want to be doing some work by yourself to get ahead of the team. That's what I'm going to call discovery in this case. You want time to understand the problem yourself before you end up getting into scoping, because you're going to be trying to support the team at that point, and if you've done no research, you're not going to be very useful. Then once the team is formed, you get into scoping. That is probably the most exciting and important part of these 3 stages, but we'll get to that in a bit. Let's start with team. So yeah, while you will inevitably add more people to this project as it progresses, you want to ensure that the team that you start with is as strong as it possibly can be. It's not impossible to make up for not being there at the start, but it is really hard. So you want to make sure that each of the choices that you make are counting. Firstly, you want to be working really closely with management. When you're staffing and building teams, that is strictly a management responsibility, but you are a staff engineer. You bring a fairly unique perspective to the choice of who should be working on this project. Firstly, you're probably the only person in the room before the project has actually got going who has worked firsthand building technical solutions with the people that you're trying to staff into the team. That gives you a fairly unique perspective, as I said, on who might be suited for the role. You've also hopefully done a bit of discovery work. That means you know, possibly better than most other people, what type of work is going to come down the pipe if you want to go solve this problem. Looking back at on-call, for us, the choices that we made around this, where I was working with my manager, were to pick people who had specific expertise that was going to be relevant for the project at hand. So one example was we brought in Rory, who ended up being the tech lead of the team because he'd spent several years building mobile apps before in the past, and we knew that a mobile app was something that we wanted to produce. We also brought in Ben Wheatley, who was one of our senior SREs, because as an on-call tool, you probably don't want the thing to be unreliable. So getting him in from the start was a really useful thing to do to set the team up for success. But yeah, my advice is when you're working with your manager, be extremely candid. Give them your list of names. These are the people who you would have as a preference to come work on the team. Explain the context as to why you put their names there. Like, why do you think that they would make a good choice? Trust your manager to then take that information and blend it with the rest of the organization's priorities, career progression, and everything that they know about those people to make a good choice for the team overall. The next thing to consider is you should start small. I think problems like these are inherently messy and chaotic when you first start them. The ideal candidates that you want are going to be unfazed by uncertainty. They have a demonstrated ability to ship fast. And as I said before, they have specific expertise that could be useful. But you want to make sure that the team is small enough that if you end up pivoting early on or even later, you're able to do so in an agile way, trying to maintain alignment with all the people that you might have at the end of the project. At the start, when everything is changing day to day, is just too much of a burden for it to be effective. Then there's this final point, which I think is really important for everyone in the room, if you are in a staff engineering position, which is you have to think very carefully about who's going to be the tech lead of the team. This is tricky because you as a staff engineer are probably a really viable candidate to be tech lead. I'm going to tell you right now, please don't do this. If at all possible, you want to be finding someone else to take this role when you start the team. And the reason for that is if you're a staff engineer working on a project like this, one of the benefits to having you on the team is that you can go where you are most useful and where you are most needed. If you start yourself as one of the fundamental key leaders of the team that you're going to try and start off, that almost inevitably is going to set you up for a problem when you try and move away from that team later and totally derail all the efforts of that team as they try and find another tech lead and bootstrap someone in. It can also be a bit daunting for someone who is a tech lead stepping into a project like this where they've got you as a technically more senior person there. So make sure whoever you do pick as a tech lead, you have a proper chat with them first and go, these are my responsibilities as I see it. This is a role that I will play in the team. Here's how I want to support you. Make sure they feel comfortable and you know how you're going to work with them. So that's about building the team. You then get discovery. So discovery is where you get to run ahead of the team. It's not about solving everything in detail. What it is about is understanding the problem. You can't give good advice to people about who should be staffed on this project or how long it's going to be unless you've done some thinking in advance of them asking those questions. So the idea is you go into this, you do some research, you identify the themes of work that you think are present in this project, so what are the constituent pieces that you think is going to form kind of the broader project plan. And then the idea of that is that if someone asks you a question like, what will this system look like, you don't just sit there and go, I don't really know. You have an answer ready that kind of provides an opinion on how you think the thing is going to go. And that's that last point there. I think it's really important that you actually form opinions. Now, these opinions are intentionally weakly held. You're not trying to go into this and come into the scoping with, like, we should do it exactly like this. A good opinion, as I see it, is something, as an example with OnCall, one of the opinions I brought was, we can do this in our monolith. So we have a monolithic application architecture. If I didn't come with that opinion, then we may have spent a large part of our scoping process considering things like, well, how do we even bootstrap this thing? How do we deploy it? I didn't want us to be focusing on those questions. I, with my experience and knowledge of the domain, think it's actually possible for us to build this in the monolith, so I'm going to provide this as an opinion or a constraint so that we can focus the discussion in the scoping on the things that I think are much more business relevant. If you're wrong, you'll find out and be okay being wrong, but as I said, you're staff engineers for a reason. You should be able to trust with most of your opinions that you're right most of the time, I should hope. So yeah, that is pre-team discovery. So now you've got a team, you've done a bit of research. Here's the fun bit. Scoping. If it's done right, scoping for these projects should be intense, exhausting, and fun. In fact, I often think of these scoping processes as some of the highlights in my career. It's just fun getting a bunch of smart people in a room, collectively solving a hard problem that you're all bought into. Trying to achieve something meaningful together actually turns out to be quite a fun time. In fact, it's so much type 2 fun, maybe, that you'll often see people reminisce about the times that they spent locked in a room with a whiteboard and post-it sticky notes, gradually losing your sanity at the expense of making progress on your project. But coming back to this, like, how, as a staff engineer, are you meant to support the scoping process in a project like this? Well, what is your role during scoping? You have a number of responsibilities here, and they're quite serious, actually. You are the most experienced technical person in the room, which means that ultimately breaking down the problem into something that is tractable is kind of your job. The buck stops with you. But I think when you start saying, how do we break down a problem, it begs the question, like, what is a good split of the problem? Like, how do you do this in a way that will help your team? And for me, the most important outcome for splitting the problem is to maintain the right level of ambiguity. So there's this concept in psychology of what they call the 3-channel flow model. It's about how people are experiencing the process of learning. And the idea is, put simply, that when you are learning, you are either bored because the challenge is insufficient, so you're not properly engaged with the task. On the other end of the scale, you're anxious because it's just too hard and you can't really grasp it. Like, you're not making progress, so you don't even really manage to engage properly. Then in the middle is this idea of the flow state, which is where it's the perfectly sized problem for you to make progress on, and you're learning and you're feeling good about it. That is where you want to find the split in a problem like this. So what I would recommend in scoping is you end up doing it in 2 stages. You get everyone together in the morning, and as a group, you work on, this is the broader problem, and collectively find the splits of that problem into smaller pieces that you can then, in the afternoon, have individuals take and delegate to people so that they can work on the solutions. The idea of this is that actually, by the time you've done it, you have people really well understanding how all the different pieces of the problem sit together, and you do that collectively, so there's a shared understanding, but you've left a huge amount of autonomy and latitude for people in their IC position in the afternoon to dig into this problem and maybe go have a chat with you about, like, something that they didn't understand in the group setting, but they can literally just put their headphones on and actually make progress themselves. And you end up with the right balance of the group working together, you supporting them, helping cut the ambiguity down, but allowing them to have enough challenge that they feel satisfied and really engaged with the problem. Great. Execution. Planning's over now. It's time to actually build the thing. So going back to this project timeline, execution is everything that happens after you've completed scoping. In the case of OnCall, it's all these separate projects that end up building the functionality that we eventually released. But I think it's really key at this point to talk about how you're going to work with the team when you get into the phase of actually building the thing. So working with the team as someone who is also leading a project can be really tricky. I'm going to start with what I think is the most important point and the one that I think is often quite confused, especially around the staff engineering role, which is you should be building. Don't shy away from that. You are actually a technical member of staff. You should actually be getting involved in the process of building these things. It's in this process when you're all in with the team that you actually build the trust that you're going to need later in order to support them from outside of that team structure. But yeah, one of the ways that this does actually go wrong is when you're working with a team, but the team doesn't quite know what level of engagement you have with them. So my advice is that you tend to have kind of 3 modes when you're working with a team as a staff. The first is all in. But this is when you're in the team, you're working as an IC, you're having impact through delivery, and you're helping build foundations. You're going to team stand-ups, you're accountable to team goals. There is no, I've got this other stuff on. That doesn't fly in this case. You need to be all in, and the team need to feel like you are with them doing the same work that they are doing so that you end up building those relationships, and so that you can have the impact that you want through actually delivering on the team, on the ground. It's by doing this that you end up avoiding the backseat driving situation or becoming kind of an armchair architect where you've got a load of opinions, but you've not done any of the things that actually could earn the team's trust in order to deliver them so that they could actually listen to them. Then there's supporting. So your goal, this is what you're tasked with, is to set this team up, set them in a direction that is suitable, and then when they start building up speed and they become more confident, you want to start stepping away gradually. So it's at this point that you stop picking up IC work and saying, I'm going to lead this, and instead what you say is, hey, my time is limited here. I think in about 2 weeks I'm going to move away from the team, so I'm here in a supporting role now. I'm going to be around if you need me. I can help tidy up the bits that I was involved in, but I'm not going to be picking up anything else. So yeah, as you're doing this, you're winding down, stay in the team rituals, continue going to stand-ups, continue going to planning, but just make it really clear with the team that your time is drawing to a close. As I say at the bottom, I think your team should always know what mode you're in. That means you should be saying it quite explicitly, and if anyone was ever asked on the team, what's Lawrence doing, they should be able to say, oh, he is fully in the team at the moment, or maybe in 2 weeks he'll be moving away to a different part of the project. Okay. That's kind of the working with, and I've mentioned this because I think it's a really fundamental part, but the stepping away and moving yourself to other parts of the project is a fundamental skill that you need to perfect if you want to be an effective staff engineer on a project like this. So, you can kind of see the path that I took initially at the start of the project was fairly linear. But as the project grows and the teams have started building some momentum, your job as a staff engineer becomes much more about the just kind of set that thing up again over there, or bootstrap that new team, or go support the thing that needs you at any particular time. So you do move around a lot, and you need to do that gracefully. So how do you do that? Firstly, you need to be flexible. Remember that I advise not putting yourself into the permanent role of a tech lead at the start. Well, this is where that's going to start paying off. You can imagine if you were tech lead, your moving away from the team becomes a question not only of where you're going to go, but who's going to backfill you, and you're backfilling a really critical part of that team. It's going to be extremely disruptive. Thank God we didn't do that. Throughout the project, you want to be thinking about where you're going to go next. You should be talking with the team leads, and they should generally know where your priorities will lie. But the key thing here is that you don't want to let your moving come as a surprise, either to yourself or to any of your team. You should have looked ahead enough that it doesn't feel like you're knee-jerking around between different parts of the project. When you do decide to move, start dialing back your involvement in IC work. So as I said before, this is kind of shifting into a different mode of operation with the team. You're supporting. You're not going to be picking up new IC work or leading anything. Remember that your team can't be your priority when you're looking to move to something else. The two things just don't work. So you need to make sure that you've never committed to the team to be doing something critical if you're actually looking at something else entirely. What I would advise is, for a period of time, after actually moving away from the team, do keep syncing with the team leads. So this is your tech lead and your PM and your EM. It's just really useful for continuity. You can provide any context that you didn't properly hand over. It kind of also feels like you haven't just run away, which is very important. The trust that you have hopefully built during your all-in, working together part of the process is what you're about to lean on in order to support the team from outside of the team structure. And if you can keep your touch points just for a bit, maybe a couple of weeks with the team leads, that's going to help you kind of smooth over any bumps that may appear. And then the last one, I think, I was talking with people before about this talk, and they were like, what's the takeaway? And I think over-communicate is definitely going to be one of them. Make sure that you're communicating your priorities so that everyone knows at any one point what you're going to do. So as I said before, your team should know Lawrence is going to move in the next 2 weeks, and they should be prepared for that. Cool. There's one more thing. This is kind of the final theme that I'm going to touch on, which is alignment. So I think as staff engineers, you have a huge amount of autonomy. I think that's fair to say. But with autonomy comes a responsibility that you need to maintain alignment with the rest of the company. You can't just be unilaterally going off in a direction that other people wouldn't agree with or want you to go in. So in general, I think you can think about this in 3 directions. You've got alignment upwards. This is to your manager or leadership and any senior stakeholders. You can maintain this alignment through catch-ups, one-to-ones, or progress reports. The problem whenever you're trying to maintain alignment upwards is that the people that you're trying to maintain alignment with are usually extremely time poor. So whenever you're sending async reports or project updates, you should assume that probably they're not going to be read. If at any point you need to actually get some attention from someone like a founder or a CTO, you want to just lock them in a room, give them something, and ask them to actually give you opinions back. If you don't do this, you're really at risk of kind of like a silent thumbs up emoji in Slack, making you think that they're listening when they're not. And actually, when it came to on-call, this was something that we really screwed up. I think the founders at the company needed to move away for a period of a few months during the project to work on other areas of the business. And whilst we had been aligned at the start, we ended up falling out of alignment during that period. When the founders came back and we tried introducing them back into the project, it was kind of difficult because despite the fact that we had been providing these progress updates and there were loads of sync sessions that we had with the company on the progress of building on-call, they'd just been so busy that they hadn't really caught up with that, or they thought that they were engaging with it when they didn't, and we hadn't done our job to check that they were. And that made it very difficult for them to then rejoin the project without us having to do a reset and try and realign, which is disruptive to the team and ultimately not what you want in a project like this. So that kind of goes to the second point. It may feel pointless until it isn't. Honestly, it's so much easier for you to maintain and preserve alignment than it is for you to try and fix it once you fell out of alignment. So if you can, just make sure that you're tapping this along for the duration of the project and you make sure that it never goes bad. You just want to maintain it as things go. And then, yeah, you've got the other 2 types of alignment. So you've got laterally with your team leads. Now, you'll do this through regular syncs, planning, being clear with project updates. And then, of course, like down, which is not really down per se, but it's the ICs on the team that you're working with. Honestly, I think alignment with the ICs that you're working with mostly comes from you actually working with them to produce product. That's where you gain trust, and that's where you figure out how they're thinking about things, and that's where they know what you're thinking about as well. But yeah, just don't let this slip. Cool. It's not easy, but it is fun. And I think it's really easy to forget some of this when you're stuck in the weeds of a project like this, because they are really stressful, they are really big, they can be very notable within your career, but also if you end up screwing this up, that it could also be notable for the wrong reasons, which is where kind of the pressure comes from. But yeah, whilst you're doing this, remember that the work is actually rewarding. Being ambitious and building really awesome stuff is kind of why you do this job, and presumably why the people that work with you do it too. So make sure that you do appreciate the work as you do it, and you look for ways to try and communicate that to the people on your team. Part of your job as a leader is to give people the energy around you to try and do their best work. And calling this out, the successes and also the failures, can actually help people feel meaning in their jobs and engage a lot better with the work that you're trying to do. We can all do the technical work. I think as staff engineers, we've got a lot of practice with that, but you will all know it is always a people problem. Make sure that you're spending enough time focusing on the glue work and making sure that people around you are aligned and happy, and you're not, even when you are in the teams working on actual delivery, you're not too much in the delivery to pick up or to miss the people problems that might be creeping up past the horizon. And then, finally, staff roles can be isolating, and I think people often forget that it's a team sport. So if you can work authentically with your team and you can genuinely turn up and go, I'm here because I want to achieve something with you together, I think you shortcut a lot of the disconnection problems that staff engineers have. Whenever you start talking with someone and they go, it's not working for me in my org, I'm not quite sure why, and you ask them when they last fundamentally worked really closely with someone on the team, it's often the case that they'll go, I can't really remember. So yeah, just remember that this is all about winning together. It's not about you turning up and trying to hero this project along. It's about you working with the people on the teams to make sure that you find an outcome that works well for you and the business. So yeah, that's it. I've got, sorry guys. So you can catch me at the office hours for questions, but actually building on-call has been a really great experience for us as an engineering org, and we've written a lot about it. So you've seen my perspective on how as a staff engineer I was interacting with the project, but if you're curious about the engineering that went behind it, we've got a ton of great blog posts over there. But yeah, that is actually it. You may clap. Thanks.